But let's go ahead and give a big hand to Alycia Wood.
I think, am I on? There we go. Well, good morning. When I was looking at the time slots I have for you guys today, I was wondering if the organizers were perhaps trying to communicate something to me, because I have you first thing in the morning when you're half awake, and then my next time with you is right after lunch when you're half awake. And so I was talking to my neighbor about this, and she said, you know what? She says, most doctors say that it's a known fact that the vast majority of people talk in their sleep. She goes, but the interesting thing about public speakers is that they talk to people who are asleep. So we'll see how this goes today. It's the early morning risers, which I never am and never have been, and the after lunch crowd. But also really quickly, I was speaking with a young lady yesterday, and she said, can you tell us a little bit more about you? So I'll give you just a quick background as to who I am. I am from upstate New York, and as was said yesterday, my undergraduate degree is in criminal justice, and my master's degree is in social justice. So apparently justice is a big thing for me. And I've also studied in England and have a certificate in apologetics, which also brings me to you. But what I like about this is that you guys are my kind of people, because I spent a good amount of years teaching. I was in middle schools and high schools, which were my favorite age group, and I had several long-term positions in math. Do I have any math lovers? Math lovers? Good, you are my instant best friends. Everybody should be math. When you told your math teacher, I will not use that stuff one day, you were wrong. You will, trust me. And so I enjoy middle school and high school and being able to be with you guys as well. So with that said and done, I've been given this topic of the problem of truth. And when we look at this idea, I understand why it's so difficult for us to embrace this whole idea and topic of truth. What exactly about truth is it that it's so important that we think we need to know it? And even worse, what if what is true is painful? What if it's something that we don't want to know? What if it might hurt us in some way? And so I understand that there's a lot of reservations that people have when it comes to this topic of truth. The famous movie, A Few Good Men, you've got that famous line in there where, I want to know the truth, and they say, you can't handle the truth. You know, it's that kind of thing. Can we handle what truth might actually be? Os Guinness says there are two ways that we can go, and we're always tempted by the two. One way is to try and shape the truth to our desires, and the other way is to seek to shape our desires to the truth. And today, it is my hope that we can shape our desires to the truth. So in order to do this, we need to look at this idea of, is truth something that we can even know? Can we even know what truth is? And I would say, yes, you absolutely can. Truth is something that exists. It is something that can be discovered. It is something that we don't have to worry about, is it going to change? It's an absolute entity. So therefore, truth is something that we can know. No matter how hard it may be to find it, it is still worth our efforts to go out and seek it. But some people say, no, you can't know what truth is. But the interesting thing about that is for someone to say, no, you can't know truth, then you are telling me a true statement. You essentially are saying, I know it's true that you can't know truth. So then therefore you believe that truth is real. Secondly, some people say that if you know that you can't know truth, and the reason why I know that you can't know truth is because I possess a greater knowledge of truth that tells me that you can't know truth. So people are kind of catch themselves in a predicament of self-contradiction when they try to say, I can't know truth. So I'm here to tell you this is something that we can know. So what is it? What is truth? I do understand that this is a difficult question. You know, I heard recently that this is the TGIF generation, meaning Twitter, Google, iPhone, Instagram, and Facebook generation. In other words, there is so much out there where we are bombarded with information. We are on information overload from the internet. We are able to communicate on Facebook to people who live in other parts of the world that we may only physically see every 10 years or so. We are exposed to more cultures and customs than we'd ever known before. How do I know what to accept? How do I know what to reject? I see so much information. So many things are put forward to me as truth. How do I know? So I do recognize this battle. I do recognize that it is difficult. But you know what, though? This is not a new question. The idea of can we find truth is not a new question. Johnny Cash, in his song back in the 1970s called What is Truth, he wrote that the lonely voice of youth cries, what is truth? 2,000 years before that, Jesus was arrested, and he was brought before Pilate, who was the Roman governor at the time. And during this time, Pilate is asking him questions about who he is. Remember, Pilate has the power to sentence him to crucifixion. So he's at his final day before his crucifixion takes place. And Pilate begins to question about himself and who Jesus is. And they go back and forth. And Jesus says to Pilate, I came into this world to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. To which Pilate responds, what is truth? And walks away. This isn't a new question. And even though it may be difficult to find, it is possible for us to discover truth. Truth has to fit into two main categories. There are others, but we're going to focus on just two today. Correspondence is the first one. Truth must correspond to reality. What do I mean by that? It means that truth must relate to what I observe things to be. So, for example, if I buy you a brand new laptop for your birthday, and I say, okay, now when you take this laptop, bring it home, take good care of it, whatever you do, don't drop it off the roof because it'll break, okay? Now, at your ages, you are very familiar with gravity, and that when you take something and you drop it, it can fall and it'll break. Okay? So if I tell you, don't drop this laptop off a roof, it'll break, you're like, I understand that. It corresponds to how I see reality. It corresponds to the facts in my life. That makes sense. I can believe that that's true. Okay? An important criteria of truth is correspondence. Secondly, coherence. Truth must cohere within itself. In other words, it must be internally consistent throughout it. So for example, I remember years back, the movie Ghost, which I'm probably dating myself by raising this movie, but it had like Patrick Swayze and Whoopi Goldberg in it. And in this movie, Patrick Swayze is a ghost. He has died and he's a ghost. And so as a ghost, he should be able to, walk through doors and, do all these kind of things because he's a spirit. But there's this one scene where he's in like a living room and he's walking by and he's talking and he walks past a plant and he brushes the plant and the plant moves. And it was a mistake in the movie, because as a ghost, he should be able to walk through it. There was an inconsistency within his character in that particular scene, whereas a ghost, he should have walked through. So truth must be coherent. It can't have any kind of conflicting things within itself. In the same way, Christianity does a fantastic job with being internally consistent and coherent. When it answers the four main worldviews, origin, or the four big questions of life, origin, meaning, morality, and destiny, when you look at the answers to those, you don't see contradictions. But this is a problem for someone who is not a Christian, who is, let's say, a naturalist or from the atheistic belief. Because while they're struggling to find an answer for origin, they have to struggle to find how does that same answer for origin produce the morals that we see? How do we work this out? Because the answer to one doesn't make sense to answer that same way to something else. So coherence and correspondence. So things must cohere and correspond to be true. Okay? If someone says to me, all black hockey pucks are white, I'm going to say that's not true because I've seen black hockey pucks that are black. And number two, you can't have black hockey pucks that are white. It's an inconsistent statement. Additionally, truth by itself is exclusive, meaning that anything that contradicts it cannot be true. So the fact that I'm standing here before you in California means that I cannot be standing in New York. I cannot be standing both here and in Africa. So if I say I am standing here, that's a true statement. If I say I'm also standing in a building in Africa, now you have a contradiction. Because truth by nature says that anything that contradicts it cannot be true. Okay? You cannot be both married and single at the same time. So now that we kind of have an idea of what truth is this something that I can live without? Can we really live our lives never knowing anything, never settling on knowing what is truth? If you think you can, then I would wonder, why would any of us ever go to university or school? I know I didn't pay money to go to university to learn something that wasn't true. That'd kind of be a waste of my time. When I'm going there, I'm believing that what I am receiving from the teachers is true. Additionally, do you have any athletes? Am I the only athlete? How many athletes do I have? Oh, I got a bunch. Good. Then you will relate to me on this story. I play hockey, and if you know anything about ice hockey, it's a pretty fast sport. And one particular time when I was playing, I was skating very fast towards the puck, and I was tripped. So I fell down on my stomach, and the girl who tripped me fell on top of me. And I'm sliding into the board, so I can see the boards coming closer to me as I'm sliding on the ice. And all I'm thinking of at this time is, oh my goodness, I'm going so fast. And what they teach you from when you're young in hockey is that if you're ever going to go into the boards, you never go into the boards with the top of your head. You never go in what they say head first. You always put your face up, and you let the boards hit you on your face so that it doesn't break your neck. Okay? Horrible image, I'm sorry. But this is what was going through my mind at this exact time. Was like, Alycia, put your head up. So at the last second, I turned, and my shoulder smashed right into the boards. So now I'm kind of laying there, not really sure if I can move or not. I slowly begin to get up, and I'm like, okay, I can still function. Everything seems pretty good. But I got to the bench and realized I can't move my arm. Long story short, I go to the ER in hockey pads. Walk in the door, and they're like, what happened? And so they helped me take my pads off, did x-rays, turns out, tore some things in my shoulder. And so the doctor said, I'm going to give you some medication to help deal with the pain. Okay? The medication he was going to give me is Percocet. Now, it's a very strong medication. Okay? At this moment in time, do you think it is important for the doctor to tell me the truth about how much medication I really should take a day? Do you think that there is a difference between taking 2 Percocets and taking 60 a day? This idea of truth plays a part in every part of our lives. For those of you who aren't athletes and still have all your ligaments attached, I'll give you another example. I was walking one day, and I got to a corner, and as I got to the corner, there was a car that was going to turn in front of me. So I waited, and they motioned for me to go. So I said, okay. So I started crossing the street, and as I'm crossing the street, I realized, wait a minute. As I'm crossing the street, I believe there's only one thing that's true right now. And that one thing that's true is that car is not going to move. If I was sitting here like, oh, I don't know what's true, I'll just kind of take a guess, see what the car does, I'd be in a lot of trouble. We can't live life just not deciding and recognizing what truth is. I wouldn't be able to even cross the street. So this topic of truth and can we live without it is no. We don't live without it. We really don't live this way. And although there are some people who say that we can, I think there's good things in life that we can give really good arguments for. But when it comes to living it out and carrying out, it's a very different thing. So why then do we take this approach to religion? Why do we just say, does it really matter what's true? Or, oh, I'll just look at it one day. Why do we take that approach to religion if we don't take that approach to even something as simple as crossing the street? Something as important as God and your eternal destiny. This is why Ravi Zacharias says, the fact is, the truth matters, especially when you're on the receiving end of a lie. So does Christianity then offer truth is the big question. I was talking with a friend of mine who is agnostic. Great friend. I'm so happy to have her in my life. We have a lot of great conversations. And I said to her one day, I said, have you ever wished that God was there? Have you ever wished there was a God? And she quickly replied, yes, I wish there was meaning and that he would bring comfort to my life. But the God that I want to exist doesn't exist in any religion. I was talking with another friend who's an atheist, a very strong atheist friend of mine. And I asked him the same question, have you ever wished that there was a God? And I want to read you what he says. His reply was, no. I hope he's not there, and I don't feel the slightest regret that there is no God. But there have been times when I have been struck by the wonder of this world, and I felt frustrated that there was no one to thank. What if truth didn't cause pain? What if it was freeing? What if it was beautiful? Have you ever wished God existed? What have you envisioned him if he did exist? What have you envisioned him to be like? Would he offer meaning for your life? Would he help you deal with loneliness? Is he a God that knows what suffering's like because he suffered himself? What would this God be like? Would he understand you? Mark Twain once said, "Faith is believing what you know ain't so." And I actually would disagree with him on that. Faith actually isn't blind for Christians at all. In fact, it's based on educated evidence, education that people have dug into and researched to find out what's true. It's based on rational events that have happened that can be investigated and checked out. I guarantee you that Nabil, Cameron, or I, that none of us just believe blindly because somebody had us a Bible and said, "Here, follow it," and now we're standing here in front of you telling you to follow it. We've done a whole lot of research and looking into these very topics. Christianity doesn't offer you a blind faith, but oftentimes people do follow something blindly because they're afraid, because of fear. Because what if I don't believe, then what will happen? And I understand that, but even that mindset still leaves one question unanswered. It leaves the fear of, what if I'm wrong about this particular thing I picked? You can't just blindly follow something. You need to know what's true. Therefore, fear may be a good motivating factor, but it should not be your foundation. Belief has to be more than that. It must be based on truth. I want to see if I can put this all together for you and talking about the idea that without truth, we cannot be free. Os Guinness said, "Far from being Neanderthal and reactionary, truth is a very precious, simple, fundamental human gift, without which we cannot negotiate reality and handle life. The truth is absolutely essential for a good human life. Equally important, truth is absolutely essential for freedom." Now that's interesting. What does this idea of correspondence and coherence have to do with freedom? How can you be free unless you know the truth about the decisions or options that you're about to make? In order to freely choose something, you want to know the truth about your options. For example, something as serious as a sword. Let's say I give you a sword, and you're thinking, "This is pretty cool. Let me just sling this around and just have fun." Then you're jumping all around and you're showing it to people. And it's like, does the truth of what that could do to somebody matter at that time? Yes, you're free to pick it up, but you need to know that it can be used for a dangerous activity. Let me see if I can explain this to you further. Tracing as far back as Kant and Berlin, we've got this idea of two kinds of freedom. One is freedom from, and the other is freedom for. Freedom from basically describes a freedom that is free from any external enforcement that infringes upon our ability to make the decisions we want to whenever we want to. In other words, we are free from rules that block our ability to act. Freedom for is the freedom one possesses to control or direct their life. Essentially, you have the resources that you need to make the choices that you want. So the difference is, one deals with the absence of external factors, the other deals with the absence of internal factors. You have the full capacity within yourself to make the decision, but in making that decision, you recognize that there will be consequences, and so you need to know the truth about the options you have before you so that you know what the consequences would be, and you can make the right decision for truth. But oftentimes people say to me, "But I am free. What do you mean I need to know truth to be free? I'm free. There's nothing wrong with me." Well, I would say that you can also not be free and not realize that you're not free. I recently read the book Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and this is a fascinating story, actually. I don't know if any of you have ever read it. It might be that some of the high schoolers have. But basically what it talks about is it talks about a world somewhere in the future that basically has decided to allow people to be more free without having any boundaries or limits on their behavior. And the way they do that is they essentially create people, essentially from conception, and they create them within the proper social statuses in society. They create them with the proper education, mindset, and in the particular intellectual ability, the career choice, all of these things, so that when they're born, they may be born in the top of society or they may be born in the bottom, and no matter where you are happy where you are. So the people at the bottom are happy to be at the bottom because I love doing these menial tasks as they oftentimes make reference to. I love just serving this person, doing that, and this is so great for me. And the people at the top, well, they look down on them and say, yeah, it stinks to be them. I'm so beautiful. I'm so perfect in every way. And look how smart I am and all these great things. So it's a society where they create people and they put them in all different kind of categories with the way to eliminate any boundaries so that we could be free. What's interesting about this is that there's a gentleman in this story called the controller. And the controller is kind of the person who is kind of overseeing all of this. What's interesting for him is as he's explaining why they would even create a world like this, he's explaining to someone who has come from a different place. He's explaining to him why they would create a world like this. He says, we traded in truth for happiness and comfort. And they were very happy and very comfortable to live in the lie and forsake truth. They misunderstood freedom to be an elimination of rules, but rather it is the ability to make choices within the system. Eliminating rules doesn't make one free. True freedom can only exist in a system of boundaries. In fact, in our very own country, when they began to form the Constitution or the laws for this country, they formed the preamble. And the preamble says this, it says, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. What's fascinating about this is that in order to secure the blessings of liberty, as it says, they create a constitution. So they create a body of laws in order to secure liberty. Why? Because it's only in a system of rules in which someone is ever truly free. This idea of truth, and for that matter, freedom, were not foreign to Jesus. Freedom didn't mean freedom from laws, but free for something else. Yes, he was questioned by Pilate about what is truth. And no, unfortunately, Pilate didn't wait for the answer. But had he may have learned that truth was standing right in front of him. Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. And when we look at another statement he said, which says, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free, then what we see here is that when we know truth, Jesus, we will be free. In Christianity, you are being set free from your slavery to sin and set free to know who you are. If you know the truth, Jesus, then he is the only one who can reveal to you the truth of who you are, and it is within that framework that you can then begin to be free. Our identity is fundamental to our freedom, and it's only through seeing the truth, Jesus, that you begin to understand the slavery you've been in and then ask to be freed. Allow me to take a minute to illustrate this through the movie The Matrix. Are any Matrix fans here? Yes, a little bit. The Matrix is a great movie. And there are so many good references and allusions to this Savior, this particular person who is somehow going to save mankind. Let me explain to you what the movie is like for those of you who are not familiar. In the movie The Matrix, it describes a society just like us. People going to different places, to jobs, to school, to just a range of places in society, living out their lives normally. What they don't realize, though, is that they are actually part of a computer program or part of a world that's controlled by computers. They are completely blind to this fact. The computers are well aware of it because they can see outside of it. They are completely blind to what they are being enslaved to. But there are a few people in this world that know the truth. And they've been waiting for the one whose name is Neo. They've been waiting for Neo, this particular one, to come and save them from their enslavement that they are in. So this particular gentleman, Morpheus, who is kind of the head guy who's trying to find the one find the one that's going to save them, meets Neo, and he's describing to Neo what exactly the Matrix is. And I want to read you a little bit of what he says. He says, "The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth." What truth? That you are a slave. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch, a prison for your mind. What's even more interesting to me about this movie is that there is a gentleman in this movie who is outside of the Matrix and part of the team that is going to help free mankind. And he decides, I'm going to betray my team and let the computers know what our plan is. And do you know why he betrays the Savior, the One? Because he would rather have money and fame than live in the truth. He would rather live in the lie than live outside of it. So he voluntarily hands these guys over to the computers. Would you ever want to knowingly live in a lie? When I was in York, in England, I remember talking with a particular gentleman, and he was fairly, I would say, a pretty strong atheist. Didn't want to have anything to do with God, religion, Christianity. Wasn't really happy to hear about all the Christian arguments. And so I started talking with him. And eventually we got to the point of our conversation where I said to him, I said, what would it take for you to believe? He's like, evidence. I want evidence. I said, okay. So if I could give you evidence right now of a woman that I personally have met who was paralyzed for over about 20 years and is now walking because somebody prayed for her, would that be enough evidence for you? And he said, no. Because I'd find a way to explain it away. I'd find a way to say it was something in her mind. I would find another alternative. Would you ever be willing to accept truth? Or would you be willing to live the lie? For this gentleman, what mattered more to him was his will than being open to what truth was. And so I ask you, do you reject the truth because it really is a lie, or because you prefer the lie? Do you prefer the lie? The only way for people to be freed from the enslavement of the computers and the Matrix was for Neo himself to free them. This savior figure had to sacrifice himself so that people who didn't even realize they were enslaved could be free. And in this wonderful scene, he stretches out his arms and sacrifices himself. Upon his death, the source, who is this, I guess you say this head computer kind of figure, this ultimate figure, upon his death, looks at him and says, "It is done." 2,000 years ago, Jesus spread his arms open. And he sacrificed himself so that people who didn't realize they were enslaved could know the truth and be free. And when in his final moments, he said, "It is finished." Truth matters. You cannot be free without it. Once you're outside the system, it's easier to know that you were enslaved to it. It's much harder to tell from the outside. The way to be open to hearing truth is to be open to embracing that something else might just be plausible. It is my hope that this is the attitude that you carry with you throughout this weekend, because the truth gives you what you need to know to be truly free. I have some extra time here that I will give you guys for questions. You are welcome to, I think, come up and use the microphones and go ahead and ask any questions that you may have about this particular topic as well. I think, are you running the questions again? Yeah, oh, up there, okay. So if you have any questions, feel free. That's good. Does that mean I answered all your questions? Is there? Okay. Okay, thank you. And I'll see this young lady right here.
Good morning, Alycia.
Good
Thank
morning.
you for being here.
Thank you.
We as Christians believe the Bible to be the fountain of truth. So if you're the one you're speaking to doesn't believe in the Bible, you end up with a circular argument.
Yep, absolutely.
How do we break away from that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And essentially what she's saying is that as Christians, we often say, use the Bible to help give credibility to the Bible. But if somebody doesn't accept the Bible, then they're going to reject your starting point from the beginning. One of the things I do to be fair to those who do reject the Bible is I start on their grounds. And most people will accept history. So for me, I start at a different place. And I look at who Jesus was through history. I look at the evidence for him. I look at the external sources about Jesus through history as well. There's a lot of writings. I shouldn't say a lot. There are several writings about Jesus outside of the Bible that give credibility to the Jesus we know inside the Bible. Ranging from the fact that he was crucified, that he did signs and wonders. I think my favorite one is that there's even a work that talks about that at the point of his crucifixion when the earth went dark, that they were trying to find a way to explain that, and so they called it an eclipse. It turns out, it wasn't an eclipse of the sun, but they were trying to figure out how do we explain this darkness. Now, this is not a Christian source that's writing this. So what's interesting to me is that there is so much of Jesus' life outside and externally from the Bible. So that, for me, is where my starting point is. Let's talk about Jesus historically. So I look at what people say about him historically. I look at the evidence for the resurrection, and I talk about the resurrection historically. But ultimately, I think that's my starting point, but where people really want me to get to is what does God mean for them? I remember spending 45 minutes in conversation with two girls, one's an atheist, one's an agnostic. Actually, no, they're both atheists. By the end of the conversation, there was an atheist and an agnostic. But they both came in as atheists. And I remember talking with them, and we were going through all this evidence and all these kind of philosophies and answering this question and that question. And after 45 minutes, they say to me, you know what, Alycia? Okay, fine. Tell me this. Why are you a Christian? Why do you hold on to this stuff? Because ultimately, they wanted to know, is he personable, and what does he have for me? What does he mean to me? So, to answer your question, I start with history, and that gives credibility in their eyes to Jesus, and that in turn gives credibility to the Bible. And then I also bring it down from the head and bring it down to the heart and talk about why this even matters at all. So, there you go. Hi.
My question has to do with the computer falling off the roof. We know the law of gravity. So my question is this. If the computer falls and we know the law of gravity is taking place, would that be considered a fact? And if it is a fact, what is the difference between fact and truth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's look at this idea of fact and truth. I don't know if I would fully separate the two in the sense that if something is a fact, then it is a truth as well. The same way that we would say it's real, okay? If there is an issue or if there's a contradiction somewhere in the statement of fact, then I would say that it's not a true statement of fact. And so therefore, truth and fact, for me, I would use them interchangeably, because to me, if there's any bit in there where there's a lie or there's a point of deception or anything like that, and then for me, it's not a fact at all. It can be an opinion. It can be a perception. It can be something they made up in their mind. But I think the fact will also correlate with reality, and the fact and truth can't be in opposition to each other. Thank you for your question.
How do you know that this Christian religion is the right one?
Oh, Nice, easy question. I love it. Yeah. Okay. How do you know this is the right one? I would say there's a couple ways that I know that. I was talking with a young lady yesterday, and I was telling her a little bit about me. I grew up in a Christian home. I don't ever remember not being a Christian. So from the time I was little, I always remember this being true. I always asked questions. I always wanted to know some of the deeper, harder things, and even from a young age. But I never not being Christian. I went to a Christian school for my undergraduate degree, and I was in a Bible class on the Old Testament when I had my first major, I guess you could say, doubt. But it was probably more than just doubt. Doubt in and of itself, I don't think is bad when you use the doubt to motivate you to look for truth. But for me, it was almost like I felt like something that the teacher had shared with us about the Bible had just, for me, made me think I can't trust this Bible at all. I can't trust Jesus. I can't believe any of this. And I remember walking out of the class thinking to myself, there is no way that you were there. And a Christian school in a Bible class. And I remember I wrestled with this for a few weeks, but there was a few things that I couldn't explain away. Number one, I couldn't explain away who this God was that I knew for so long. It was like as if somebody told me, yeah, you know your friend that you've been hanging out with all the time, that wasn't really real. But I'm like, but I've experienced this friend. I have encountered and engaged and talked with this friend. And I couldn't explain that part of it away. How do I know that Christianity is the truth? I think there's several factors. Number one, I think the fact that I have encountered this God, and I know who he is through the Bible, which I also see evidence and credibility for. I also see an overwhelmingly large amount of evidence for the resurrection. You may be surprised to know that the vast majority of scholars, Christian or not, will agree on a large number of facts surrounding the resurrection. There's a lot of details about it that really aren't disputed, whether or not you're Christian or an atheist. So I think I look at the evidence. I think I've looked at how I've seen God act in other people's lives, but I think I also have experienced him myself. And I think this is why when people say Christianity or faith is blind, I'm like, whoa, there's so much more to it than that. You're not going to hand me a book and say, follow it, and I'm going to shape my life after this. That's just not going to work for me. I need something more than that. And so what I'm grateful for is that what Christianity offers is a God who is relational and wants to be known by you. Jesus even said, believe in me, if not for the miracle, the evidence of the miracles themselves. And being someone who has, like I gave that example of the woman in a wheelchair who has experienced miracles, I've experienced healings for something nowhere near as big as what she experienced for. And having him active in my life in a variety of ways, along with the fact that when you look at the Christian worldview, when I look at the world around me, it makes sense. When I look at even just being in California and looking at how people are seeking, and I'll talk a little bit more about this afternoon, but how people are seeking and longing for something and this fulfillment of something. And for someone like me who knows it, who has found that, I can see it so clearly that they're never going to be satisfied and they're never going to be happy because what they're looking for, their God that they're looking for, will never fulfill them. It makes sense of how I see morality. It makes sense of how I experience life. So I think for me, it's a variety of factors that all are internally consistent and for me, make a very strong case that there is no other truth but Christianity. Thank you. That was a great question. Yeah.
So I get this a lot from my atheist friends, and like the only way I can really answer it is like he wouldn't.
Okay.
But so if God could do everything, then he can make a rock that he cannot move. Mm-hmm. So if he can't move the rock, then how could he do everything?
Yeah. Great. That's a good question. Yes, I understand this one. All right, so let me explain this idea of an all-powerful God, okay? What he can do. Yes, God can do everything, but he cannot do something that is, you could say, logically contradictory, okay? So, for example, he cannot sin. He can't, okay? He cannot do something that's against his very nature. Otherwise, he would not be perfect, okay? So there is a contradiction there within him. So when we look at this idea of God as all-powerful, we think that that means that anything that we can imagine possible, he could do. But the problem with that is the minute you step into anything possible, then we can envision a God that says rape is good. We can envision a God that says, walking around and stabbing something with a spoon all day long is good. We can envision all kinds of things. Okay, but then we've changed him from being a perfect, all-powerful God, and he's no longer at that place. So God can do anything that is not logically contradictory to his very nature or to his existence. So he cannot make a square circle. Anything like that is not something that he can do. So I've heard that question many times actually as well, and you're right, they do throw that at you. And so that's one thing I would definitely say to them.
Hi.
Hi.
I guess I don't know how to put this question, but if Christianity is truth, then how do you explain different Christians claiming different truths? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, okay. How do you explain different Christians claiming different truth? I think you can take anything and twist it. Let's say I give you a laptop, and I give you the ability to use it, and instead of using it for school and math, you instead use it to, break into people's emails. I think you can take the truths of Christianity, and I think you can twist them to your own desires. You can twist them so that it makes you feel better in terms of your own happiness and comfort. You can twist them so that it contours more to your will and what you want to be true, and abuse it, essentially. There's been many things that people have done, and many abuses that people have done in the name of Christianity. So I think when people take the truth of Christianity and they twist it and they claim to have many truths, I don't think that's a problem with Christianity. I think that's a problem with the Christian or the person that is claiming to be a part of this truth. There is only one truth in Jesus, and for us to take it and twist it is a very dangerous thing, and it's a very deceptive kind of a thing, and it's something that's caused great harm. So now there is genuine times when people are like, I'm not sure what's true, and they're still trying to figure out and still trying to discover it, and that's fair. Like I said in the beginning, truth is something we discover. So that's fine if you're still looking for it and you're still trying to sort through what the possible options are, and that's okay. But I think that when we make final declarations of truth, are they truly because, we have seen that this is what the Bible is actually saying, or is this because it's what we want it to say? And I think that's why you can see conflicting views on truth. Looks like that might be it. Okay, thank you so much, guys.